In the 1960s, you see a rise of the People's Revolution in the United States and an anti-war movement. You also see the greatest period of rebellion against authority, maybe in the history of the United States. Of the youngest president ever elected by the people of the United States. That is John Fitzgerald Kennedy, or JFK. And JFK brings in this era of everyone super excited. They think he can do all this stuff. Now, towards the beginning of his presidency, he actually made a few mistakes. He met with Nikita Khrushchev, who takes over after Stalin's dead. Sorry, Jose. And Khrushchev thinks he can push Kennedy around. Kennedy was on certain medications due to his Addison's disease in his back. A doctor fixed it, and so now we're going to talk about when Jack Kennedy totally slayed it. Now, that's the Cuban Missile Crisis. I lied to you. We need to go back a little bit further. See, when Kennedy took office, the CIA had a plan called the Bay of Pigs, or La Bahía de Cochinos. And what we were going to do is, we were going to train Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and kick out the communist leader there, Fidel Castro. It didn't work because we didn't live up to our end of the bargain, so Kennedy looked bad. But he's going to be redeemed with something called the Cuban Missile Crisis. See, Kennedy had already promised the people of Berlin that he was with them, that he would back them up. He went there and he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." He might have said, "I am a jelly donut."
Oh, ich bin ein Berliner.
But that's not neither here nor there. So what Kennedy does during the Cuban Missile Crisis may be the finest moment by any U.S. president, because no U.S. president has faced more danger for the country than Jack Kennedy. So Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviet Union had sent nuclear missiles to Cuba. We know this because we flew over a spy plane called a U-2, confirmed it. So now Kennedy has a couple options. One, he could do nothing. Not really an option. Two, someone just did moose ears at me. It was Austin Villarreal. You should give him a high five if you see him. So, Kennedy has three options. We already said, number one, he could do nothing. Not an option. Most of his advisors, especially his military leaders, like guys like Curtis LeMay, are telling him, "Mr. President, you need to launch a strike now. And here's what's going to happen. You're going to launch the strike, then the Soviets are going to attack Berlin, and then we're going to attack them here, and they're going to attack us here, and we'll launch a few nukes. But you got to act." Kennedy doesn't like that option. So he goes and he forms something called XCOM. Long story short, he has all these young, smart minds come up with an idea. They're going to do a blockade. They're going to use the Navy to surround the island of Cuba and not let any ships in or out. Now, a blockade is an act of war. So they're really smart, like I said. So they don't call it a blockade. They call it a quarantine. And it works. The Soviets back down. The old saying is, we got into a staring contest and they blink first. Now, why this is the greatest moment, like I said, maybe of any sitting U.S. president, is this. We have never been closer to blowing up planet Earth than we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis under the leadership of Jack Kennedy. And so everyone's super excited. He's doing a super good job, and then he gets killed. The major issue of the 1960s actually starts in the 1950s, and the major issue is the Vietnam War. Under Eisenhower, we had a very, very limited presence in Vietnam. Under Kennedy, it grew a little bit, and he had what's known as military advisors. We were talking to them and trying to figure out how to help the South Vietnamese win the war. After Kennedy's assassination, you get LBJ. LBJ, Terry Murphy, be quiet. LBJ is going to escalate the war in Vietnam, and he does it through a law called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which allows him to basically declare war without Congress's approval. We're going to go through, thank you, sir, we're going to go from having roughly about 10 to 15,000 soldiers to 250,000 in less than a year. Thanks, bud. Under this escalation, the U.S. is going to go from advising to direct fighting, to search and destroy. Yes, Terry? Yes, you can go to the locker room. Back to y'all. So now, we're going to go on a search and destroy mission. Now, what you got to understand about Vietnam is we didn't lose the war in the jungle. We lost Vietnam in the living room. We won almost every battle we fought. So why did we lose Vietnam? We lost Vietnam because you have President Johnson telling you we're winning this war, and then something called the Tet Offensive happens. And the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese attack roughly about 120, 123 cities at once. So you have this group of people that President Johnson just told you is completely defeated, it's just a matter of time, and they attack more than 100 places at once. And you see that on TV, and you realize that maybe he's not telling you the truth, and there's a credibility gap there between what he's saying and what you hear and what you believe. It gets so bad that LBJ is not going to run for a second term. And that's even though he did all this stuff on the home front as well, that we'll talk about here after we get done talking about Vietnam. And LBJ once said that, you know, Vietnam killed my true love, and that was trying to help the American people. So after LBJ, you get Richard Nixon, and Richard Nixon says we're going to have peace with honor. And what peace with honor means is he's going to bomb the hell out of North Vietnam. He's going to invade a second country called Cambodia. While doing this, we're going to do something known as Vietnamization. I'm getting really good at making the word appear here. Vietnamization is where we withdraw American troops and have the fighting done by South Vietnamese forces. And North Vietnam eventually comes to negotiate because they know if we leave, we're not coming back. And they were right. Vietnam proves to be such an unpopular war, and the anti-war movement gains so much momentum that people don't trust their government to this day. The anti-war movement did everything from protests to burning draft cards to not showing up to their draft enlistments. And eventually this comes to a boil at a place called Kent State University. At the end of the day, 4 protesters were shot by the National Guard. Now, one side says the Guard just started shooting, the other side said the Guard was defending themselves. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. But at the end, the math says 4 students were dead. This is during Nixon's period. Vietnam proved so wildly unpopular that we changed the law and realized that we made a mistake. We made a mistake with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. We gave the president way too much power to launch a war anytime he felt it necessary. So we replace it with the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act says the president has roughly about 60 days that he can deploy troops. So that way he can react to emergency situations. After that, if he does not get Congress's approval, he has 30 days to get all the troops home. So he's going to be very busy if Congress doesn't approve. And so we take that power back down. The other thing is we realize if you're 18 years old, you should be old enough to vote. So we passed the 26th Amendment. The 26th Amendment lowers the age to 18. Here's the logic behind that. If I'm old enough to go die in the jungle, I'm old enough to vote for the guy who sends me there.